Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for November 16th, 2022. I have a few updates for you, and we'll start with the one which is probably most significant, that the world dodged a bullet yesterday with the events on the Polish border with a missile killing 2 civilians. I'll also give you a report on the Global South initiatives coming from the G20 summit in Bali. And somewhat eclipsed by these events was the announcement yesterday in Mar-a-Lago, Florida, that Donald Trump will be running for president again, that he made his announcement yesterday. But I think the most important story to start with is what happened in Poland yesterday when an explosion occurred, killing 2 civilians. And naturally, the danger of escalation is something that we've been reporting, that by accident or false flag, you could have a nuclear war triggered. Fortunately, that didn't happen yesterday, although it was not because the Ukrainians didn't try to make it happen. Initially, the Associated Press reported an unnamed U.S. official who said it was probably a Russian missile that hit Poland. Now, this was seconded by Kuleba, the foreign minister of Ukraine, who said it was definitely a Russian missile. But shortly after that, the Daily Beast reported that there were 3 U.S. officials who said they doubted that it was a Russian missile, and it was probably a Ukrainian missile that either by accident or was fired in defense of the Russian air attack that caused this. Now, this didn't stop the clown show put on by Ukrainian President Zelensky at the G20 meeting. He, of course, blamed Russia. He called for a full-scale NATO intervention. This led to talk of Article 5 of the NATO Charter, that all NATO members must come to defense of any NATO member under attack, which in this case would have been Poland. But the evidence coming out indicates that this was an old Soviet era air defense missile, which is used by Ukraine. President Biden himself stepped back from blaming Russia, saying it did not appear to be a Russian missile. And as evidence is coming forward, it does appear that this was something fired by Ukraine. Now, what this really emphasizes is the need for real diplomacy to put an end to this war, not the kind of fake proposal put forward yesterday by Zelensky at the G20, where he said Ukraine is committed to negotiations and then gave a list of demands, all of which were that that nothing be granted to guarantee security for Russia and Ukraine be given every benefit. This is something that Zelensky has been saying from the beginning. But the idea that Russia is not willing to negotiate, when it was Zelensky who walked away from the negotiations in April under pressure from Boris Johnson on behalf of NATO. So this just shows that the issue here is real diplomacy. Now, there are indications there may be diplomacy. We don't know to what extent this is fake or real, but there was a meeting yesterday, I believe, or the day before, by CIA Director William Burns, meeting with Russian Foreign Intelligence Director Sergei Naryshkin. The ostensible topic was how to avoid a nuclear war. But this could be a reopening of channels for a real dialogue. We'll see what happens with that. Also, yesterday at the G20, French President Macron spoke with both Xi Jinping and with Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, about the opening of a dialogue with Putin. And Germany's Chancellor Scholz expressed support for such a dialogue. So this could be a step in the right direction. The explosion yesterday underlines the need to bring this war to a close. Now, the role of France and Germany is important in this because these were the original partners with Russia and Ukraine in the negotiations at Minsk that led to the Minsk I and Minsk II agreement. Zelensky should stop playing the victim, because under Minsk II, Ukraine was supposed to stop shelling the Donbass, stop the war that had been going on for 8 years, that it cost 14,000 lives, mostly civilians in the Russian-speaking areas of the Donbass. Poroshenko said they only signed it to buy time. Zelensky campaigned for president in saying he would fulfill the accords and then turned around and did nothing. In fact, violated them by not only continuing to allow the shelling, but preparing for a major invasion before the Russian special military operation. In fact, the February 24th special military operation occurred to preempt the likelihood of a Ukrainian invasion into the Donbass. So real diplomacy means going back to Putin's demand from December 2021, which is recognition of the legitimate security interests of Russia, of Ukraine, and all nations, going back to the idea of the Peace of Westphalia, as opposed to a rules-based order, which is imposed by the arbitrary application of force, military force, by the US and NATO. So as I say, we may have dodged a bullet, but we may not be so lucky next time. Now, from the Bali G20 meeting, interesting developments outside of the clown show put on by Zelensky. There was a meeting between Argentine President Fernandez and China's President Xi Jinping. Argentina is clearly moving to join the BRICS. They've indicated their desire to do so. And Fernandez emphasized multilateralism and a commitment to work with China on this, as opposed to a unipolar order. Xi announced the increase of a swap agreement, a currency swap for Argentina of $5 billion, which is desperately needed for Argentina at this point to increase their foreign reserves. They also discussed the follow-up to the memo of understanding signed between Argentina and China on the Belt and Road Initiative, to extend the idea of the Belt and Road Initiative into South America. And this would include financing of Belt and Road Initiative projects. Now, also, there was an announcement yesterday that there's a confirmation that India and Japan remain committed to participate in Russia's Sakhalin oil and gas projects, the oil and gas projects on Sakhalin Island. This occurs after ExxonMobil opted out of this. But both India and Japan reiterated their commitment to it. And this again is part of the multilateralism that is under attack by the unipolar order. The sanctions against Russia are supposed to stop these kinds of agreements, but it doesn't stop Japan's need for oil and gas or India's need, and they're pursuing their national interests with Russia, in spite of the pressure to break all ties with Russia. Now, further, earlier this month, there was an announcement from the visit of the Tanzanian president to China that they will be expanding the cooperation of Tanzania with the Belt and Road Initiative in Africa. This includes not merely an extremely important upgrading of a rail system, but also highways, port, and manufacturing projects, which will also include Zambia and Zimbabwe. And the Tanzanian president in this meeting announced his government's commitment to support China regarding issues such as Taiwan, Hong Kong, and other core interests of China. So we see this idea of the global South asserting itself, saying that they will not accept the bullying coming from the rules-based order, that is, the interests of the Wall Street, City of London, global corporate cartels who have been using, or which have been using, US and NATO military to impose their will. With the outbreak of war in Ukraine and the fact that the Russians have made it clear that there is an alternative to this rules-based order, that there is negotiations for new financial transactions, for new credit systems, a move away from a collapsing dollar system and the use of arms to impose a new form or an extended form of colonialism in the global South. This has emboldened leaders who are now saying, we have sovereign interests and we will stand for those sovereign interests. This is not a threat to Americans. As Americans, we have no interest in imposing colonial underdevelopment on the rest of the world. It's in our interest, in fact, that the Global South engage in the kinds of projects that will raise the standard of living exactly as China has, lifting 800 million people out of poverty through its internal development programs. So the extension of these programs, the Belt and Road Initiative, the work of the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and other credit agencies for development, this is in America's interest. We need projects like this not only to work with other countries, but for the United States. We don't need green projects of the Build Back Better, which is a phony anti-inflation program and a phony energy program. We need real economic development. And one of the ways to get to it is to break with this neoliberal commitment to the rules-based order and instead go back to the American system of physical economy as designed by Lyndon LaRouche. That's the future for the United States that should be on the agenda. That's the one we're putting on the agenda, and it's already on the agenda, as you can see from developments in the G20 summit in Bali. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back with more for you tomorrow.